She walked into embassies where seasoned diplomats lowered their voices the moment she appeared. Powerful men trusted her. Intelligence officers watched her. Writers fell hopelessly in love with her. And for nearly half a century, no one could answer one impossible question. Whose side was she really on? Britain believed she was working for the Soviets. The Soviets suspected she had become a British asset. Germany believed she was quietly feeding information to London. Some historians would later argue she wasn't loyal to any country at all, only to herself. Every government wanted her watched. None could prove what she truly was. Her private dinners influenced politicians. Her friendships reached the highest levels of British intelligence. She survived revolutions, escaped executions, outlived dictators, and somehow always landed beside the most powerful men in Europe. Whenever one regime collapsed, she simply appeared beside the next one. It almost seemed impossible. How could one woman survive some of the bloodiest political upheavals of the 20th century while thousands around her disappeared forever? The answer begins in Imperial Russia. Long before the world knew her name, long before intelligence agencies started opening secret files with her photograph inside, long before whispers spread through Europe about a woman who could charm revolutionaries one night and dine with aristocrats the next, her name was Moura Budberg, and her story remains one of history's greatest unsolved espionage mysteries. She was born on February 26, 1892, into privilege, not in a palace, but close enough. Maria Ignatievna Zakrovskaya entered a world where wealth, titles, and influence determined a person's future long before they spoke their first words. Her father was a respected Russian nobleman and government official. Her family moved comfortably through the highest circles of the Russian Empire. From the outside, her future seemed written. A respectable marriage, a comfortable estate, a quiet aristocratic life. History had other plans. As a young woman, Moura possessed something people noticed immediately. It wasn't simply her beauty. It was the confidence with which she carried herself. She listened more than she spoke. She watched people carefully. And when she finally did speak, people paid attention. Friends later described her as magnetic. Others called her dangerously intelligent. Years later, intelligence officers would describe those very same qualities as perfect recruitment material. But at the time, she was simply another young aristocrat preparing for marriage. In 1911, she married Baron Dijoan von Budberg, a Baltic German nobleman serving in the Imperial Russian army. The marriage gave her a title, Baroness Budberg. It also gave her 2 children. For a brief moment, life appeared stable. Yet beneath the surface, the Russian Empire was beginning to crack. Political unrest spread through the cities. Factories erupted into strikes. Revolutionary groups operated in secret. The Tsar still ruled, but fewer people believed he would rule for long. Then came World War I. Millions marched to the front. Entire families disappeared almost overnight. The Russian economy began collapsing. Food shortages became common. Violence became normal. And Moura watched the world she had been born into slowly fall apart. But while many noble families fled Russia, she stayed. That decision would change everything. Because in Petrograd, she met a man unlike anyone she had ever known. His name was Bruce Lockhart, a British diplomat, charming, fearless, and secretly involved in one of the most dangerous intelligence operations unfolding inside revolutionary Russia. Their relationship became immediate. Some described it as love. Others believed it was something far more strategic. Because by then, the Bolsheviks had seized power. The Tsar was gone. The old Russian aristocracy had become enemies of the new state. Every conversation was monitored. Every visitor was watched. Every foreign diplomat was under suspicion. Lockhart himself had become a target of the Soviet secret police. And somehow, Moura remained at the center of it all. Was she simply a woman caught between 2 worlds? Or had someone already begun turning her into an intelligence asset? No one knew. But within months, she would be arrested. And the choices she made inside a Soviet prison would fuel one of history's greatest espionage mysteries for the next 50 years. The prison cell was cold, silent, and designed to break people long before the interrogations began. Outside, revolutionary Russia was descending into chaos. Executions had become routine. Anyone connected to the old aristocracy or to foreign governments could disappear overnight. Moura had every reason to believe she would be next. The Chayka, The Soviet secret police accused her of maintaining contact with British intelligence through Bruce Lockhart. They wanted names, networks, evidence of a conspiracy against the new Bolshevik government. But Moura gave them almost nothing. What happened next remains one of the greatest mysteries of her life. Instead of facing execution like so many others, she was suddenly released. Why? One explanation points to Maxim Gorky, the world-famous Russian writer. Gorky reportedly admired Moura's intelligence and appealed to powerful figures on her behalf. Another theory is far darker. Some historians believe the Chayka offered her a choice: work for us, or never leave this prison alive. No document has ever confirmed that conversation. But what happened after her release has kept historians arguing for more than a century. Because Moura didn't flee Russia. She stayed. And almost immediately, she began moving through circles that ordinary citizens could never enter. She visited government offices, met influential officials, maintained contact with foreigners, and somehow managed to survive while countless former aristocrats vanished forever. To British intelligence, it looked suspicious. To Soviet intelligence, it wasn't much better. Neither side fully trusted her. Yet both sides continued allowing her access. Then her relationship with Bruce Lockhart exploded into an international scandal. In 1918, British intelligence became linked to what became known as the Lockhart plot, a failed plan allegedly aimed at overthrowing the Bolshevik government. Whether the conspiracy was real, exaggerated, or partly fabricated is still debated today. What isn't debated is the aftermath. The Soviet government arrested Lockhart. Several alleged conspirators were executed. Foreign diplomats rushed to escape Russia. Once again, Moura found herself standing at the center of history. Lockhart was eventually exchanged in a prisoner swap and returned to Britain. But Moura remained behind. Many expected she would never see him again. Instead, their story was only beginning. And as Europe slowly recovered from revolution, another extraordinary man entered her life. A man whose books would become famous around the world. A man who would trust her with his heart. While intelligence agencies quietly wondered whether they should trust her with anything at all. When Moura finally left Soviet Russia, she didn't disappear into obscurity. She stepped directly into another world. London, the heart of the British Empire. It should have been a fresh start. Instead, it became another chapter filled with unanswered questions. By now, British intelligence knew exactly who she was. A Russian aristocrat, the former lover of Bruce Lockhart, a woman who had survived the Chayka. Someone who had somehow walked out of Soviet Russia alive when thousands of others never did. That alone made her suspicious. MI5 quietly opened a file. Inside, investigators asked a simple question. Had Moura Budberg been turned into a Soviet agent? No one could answer it. But they kept watching. Meanwhile, Moura seemed completely unfazed. Rather than hiding from influential people, she surrounded herself with them. At glamorous dinners, private clubs, exclusive literary gatherings. She became one of London's most fascinating women. Then another extraordinary man entered her life. His name was Herbert George Wells, better known to the world as H.G. Wells, the legendary author behind The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, and The War of the Worlds. Wells was already one of the most famous writers on Earth. He had met presidents. Kings admired his work. His books had changed modern science fiction forever. Yet when he met Moura, he was captivated. Friends noticed it immediately. She challenged him intellectually. She matched his wit. Unlike most people, she wasn't impressed by his fame. She simply treated him as another man across the dinner table. For Wells, that was irresistible. Their relationship quickly became one of the most talked about romances in literary circles. They traveled together, spent years side by side. She became his closest companion. Many believed she was the love of his later life. But while Wells saw a brilliant, sophisticated woman, British intelligence saw something very different. A woman with extraordinary access. Think about it. She had intimate relationships with one senior British diplomat, and now one of Britain's most influential public intellectuals. She attended dinners filled with politicians, military officers, journalists, and foreign visitors. If someone wanted information, she was perfectly positioned to collect it. Was she doing exactly that? Or was it simply guilt by association? Again, there was no proof, only suspicion. Then another remarkable detail emerged. She also maintained contact with Soviet officials. Not secretly, openly. She traveled, corresponded, and somehow managed to move between East and West during a period when trust between the two worlds was collapsing. British officers became increasingly uneasy. One intelligence memo reportedly described her as a woman whose true loyalties could never be determined. Another investigator believed she deliberately encouraged the mystery, because uncertainty was protection. If nobody knew whose side she was on, everyone became careful around her. It was a dangerous game, and Moura played it for decades. But as Europe drifted toward another catastrophic war, the questions surrounding her became even darker. Because this time, the enemy wasn't revolutionary Russia. It was Nazi Germany. And once again, Moura Budberg somehow found herself standing exactly where history was about to explode. By the late 1930s, Europe had become a continent holding its breath. Hitler was expanding his power. Stalin trusted almost no one. Britain was preparing for a war it desperately hoped to avoid. And somehow, Moura Budberg still moved comfortably between people who should never have trusted the same person. To outsiders, she appeared to be nothing more than a sophisticated socialite. Elegant, intelligent, always in the right room at the right time. But intelligence agencies don't judge people by appearances. They judge them by patterns. And Moura's pattern was impossible to ignore. She knew British diplomats. She knew Soviet officials. She knew journalists, writers, military officers, politicians. If there was sensitive information floating around London, there was a good chance Moura had heard at least part of it. MI5 continued watching. Soviet intelligence reportedly continued taking an interest. Even decades later, historians would argue over the same question. Was she passing information, or simply collecting powerful friends? The frustrating truth is that no document has ever answered that question with certainty. Then came World War II. Britain became one of the most heavily monitored countries in the world. Security tightened overnight. Foreign nationals were scrutinized. Telephone calls were intercepted. Letters were opened. Suspicion became a way of life. Yet Moura remained remarkably untouched. She continued living in London, continued meeting influential people, continued building relationships. It was almost unbelievable. If she truly worked for Soviet intelligence, she was one of the greatest spies of the century. If she didn't, then she may have been one of the most misunderstood women in modern history. Even H.G. Wells never seemed completely certain who Moura really was. He adored her, trusted her, yet friends later recalled that there was always something unreachable about her. It was as if part of her life existed behind a locked door that no one else could open. She rarely explained herself. She almost never defended herself against accusations. Instead, she smiled, changed the subject, and moved on. That silence became part of her legend. Years passed. Governments changed. Wars ended. New intelligence files were created. Old ones remained classified. Every few years, another historian believed they had finally solved the mystery. Then another piece of evidence would appear, contradicting everything. Some former Soviet officers later claimed Moura had indeed worked for Moscow. Others insisted she had become a British source. A few researchers reached an even stranger conclusion. Perhaps both sides believed they were using her, while she was quietly manipulating them all. If that was true, she accomplished something almost impossible. She survived the Russian Revolution, the rise of Stalin, 2 world wars, and decades of international espionage, without ever being publicly exposed as an active spy. Very few people in history can say the same. But the greatest mystery of Moura Budberg's life wasn't how she survived. It was what she chose to take with her to the grave. Because when she died, the answers died with her. When Moura Budberg died in London on August 31st, 1974, there was no dramatic confession, no hidden diary, no secret codebook waiting beneath the floorboards. No government stepped forward to claim her, and no intelligence agency officially admitted she had ever worked for them. Instead, they left behind something even more fascinating. Questions. By then, the Cold War was at its height. British intelligence files mentioning Moura remained classified for years. Soviet archives revealed only fragments. Every newly released document answered one mystery, while creating 2 more. Some researchers became convinced she had been recruited by the Soviet secret police shortly after her arrest in revolutionary Russia. Others pointed to her decades-long relationships with influential British figures and argued she had quietly provided information to London instead. Then came an even more unsettling theory. What if everyone had misunderstood her? What if Moura Budberg wasn't a loyal Soviet spy or a loyal British asset, but an extraordinary survivor? A woman who understood one simple truth. Power changes, governments fall, empires collapse. But people always need information. Throughout her life, she rarely spoke about politics. She almost never explained her past. Even close friends admitted there were years of her life they knew absolutely nothing about. It was almost as though she had carefully erased entire chapters of her own story. Bruce Lockhart never truly forgot her. Neither did H.G. Wells. Two remarkable men. Two completely different worlds. Yet both were captivated by the same woman. That alone says something extraordinary about who Moura was. Today, historians continue searching through intelligence archives in Britain, Russia, and elsewhere, hoping one forgotten document will finally reveal the truth. But perhaps that's exactly why her story has survived for more than a century. Some mysteries lose their power once they're solved. Moura Budberg's only grows stronger. Was she one of the Soviet Union's most valuable agents? A British intelligence source hidden in plain sight? A master manipulator who played both sides against each other? Or simply a brilliant woman trapped inside one of history's most dangerous eras? No one can answer with complete certainty. And perhaps no one ever will. Because the most successful spies are not always the ones who escape capture. Sometimes, they're the ones who leave the world arguing about who they really were. If you enjoyed uncovering one of history's greatest unsolved espionage mysteries, subscribe to her Silent Strength for more true stories of extraordinary women whose lives changed history and whose secrets still refuse to die.